السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ناصر المستضعفين، قاهر الجبابرة الطواغيت الظالمين، الذي جعل العاقبة للمتقين والعدوان على الظالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما وفقها في الدين يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, we are coming to a close of this series, inshallah ta'ala. We'll do the conclusion at the end. For now we'll continue as with all week with a quick recap of last week's session, inshallah ta'ala. So a quick run through of what we covered last week. So last week we covered the facts and figures with it, what took place in terms of destruction, killings, the number of injured, etc. in the Intifada al-Aqsa, Intifadat al-Aqsa, the second Intifada. Thereafter we went through the assassinations that were carried out by the Israeli forces during that period, and the major names who we covered last week were Salah Shahada, who was one of the key commanders of the Islamic resistance in Gaza, and he was killed in July 2002 alongside his family. Thereafter Sheikh Ahmed Yassin was killed on returning back from Fajr Salah in March 2004. Thereafter Dr. Abdul Aziz Al-Rantisi was killed a month later in April 2004. Thereafter Adnan Al-Ghul was killed in the same year in October 2004. And most of these were all airstrikes carried out by the Israeli Air Force. Thereafter we covered the August to September 2005, the decision by Ariel Sharon to do a unilateral removal of the settlements or evacuation of the settlements in Gaza. And we discussed that there were just over 8,000 settlers who left Gaza, but in the same period the number of settlers in the West Bank increased by 15,000. And we mentioned that the reason for the evacuation was not to give the Palestinians what they wanted, but rather it was a plan to isolate the Palestinians, and also because of demographics, because the number of Israeli settlers in the Gaza Strip was very minimal and very little compared to the population of Palestinians. And also a number of directives or reasons were accounted by the historians and also by the Israelis themselves in order to stall or put an end to the peace process and the prospect of any Palestinian state. Thereafter, the Rafah border until that point had been completely controlled by the Israeli forces, and as per the Sinai agreement that was signed much earlier on, the Egyptian troops were not allowed in the Sinai desert. But as part of this, 750 troops with heavy weaponry were allowed to come and guard the border in order to stop Palestinian resistance fighters from smuggling and crossing the border, etc., between Egypt and Gaza. And so this was called the Philadelphia Accords. And thereafter we discussed the blockade of Gaza started at this point in 2005. In 2006, there was international pressure for there to be elections in the Palestinian territories, and so elections took place. They were monitored by international monitors in the elections. Hamas also had a party, and they won 74 out of 132 seats, and so they got an overwhelming majority. Therefore, they was by default were to come into power. However, despite the internationally acclaimed fair, etc., and very professional elections, the results were not recognized, and this led to the pressure which we saw, which took place later on. Thereafter, in June 2006, so after the political process, election process has come to an end almost, then Jamal Abu Samhadana, who was the head of internal security of the new government that had been of the Prime Minister of who was Ismail Haniyeh. He was killed, assassinated by the Israeli forces. Thereafter, on the 9th, the Ghalia family was killed. All of them were killed by Israeli shelling on the beach in Gaza. On the 13th, IDF killed another 11 Palestinians in Gaza, and they continued to bomb Gaza, and they also did a ground raid or incursion into Gaza during this period. On the 25th of June 2006, the Palestinian resistance fighters, they entered into, or just by the border of Gaza, they raided an Israeli checkpoint and they captured a soldier called Gilad Shalit. Thereafter, the Israeli forces, they did an operation in Gaza from June to November 2006. They called it Operation Summer Rains. The goal or the stated goal was to stop rocket attacks and to get back the soldier Gilad Shalit. However, they were unable to get the soldier back. Thereafter, we have in July 2006. So that same year, Hezbollah from Lebanon, they do a cross-border raid. They kill 8 IDF soldiers. They capture 2, but they are killed, which transpires afterwards. Israel then launches an attack on Lebanon. It lasts 34 days. We have over 1,000 Lebanese are killed, or over 1,100. We have over 1 million displaced. We have the Qana massacre that took place on the 30th of July 2006, where the Israeli aircraft, they bombed a residential building, killing 56, including 32 children. And then that was the end of the war in Lebanon. Following that point, you see international pressure and the US leading to the ceasefire on the 14th of August. The political process continued, and as we said, there was international pressure. The Middle East Quartet, who are the US, the Russia, EU, they all pressured the Palestinian Authority that the government that has been set up or elected with Hamas and Ismail Haniyeh at its head, it should be undermined. And so we discussed Mahmoud Abbas and the conflict between Mahmoud Abbas and his party, mainly Fatah, and the ruling or the Palestinian government of Hamas, and the international plan to undermine the government, the anti-terror training, etc. So we went through that in detail, the administrative powers that Mahmoud Abbas took. He increased the presidential guard from 90 soldiers to 1,000, which eventually by 2007 increased to 3,500, trained by the US, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey and Israel on anti-terror combat, etc., logistics and equipment and vehicles provided by the UK, the European Union and Spain, etc., which then culminated eventually before a war took place, or you could say clashes took place in Gaza. In March 2007, a national unity government was formed between the factions. However, Abbas, who was the president, was not happy with this due to international pressure, and so a month later, or a few months later, in June 2007, clashes broke out. It was a preemptive strike by the Islamic resistance movement against Fatah, due to the soldiers being trained to do or carry out a coup against the government. And so there were over 100 Palestinians were killed in the clashes, but eventually Hamas takes over the whole of the Gaza Strip. And therefore you end up with 2 parallel governments in the Palestinian territories, one in the West Bank run by Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, where he installs an emergency government, and then in Gaza, which is run by the Islamic resistance movement. And then we covered the few wars, which is known as mowing the lawn, that takes place in Gaza and has continued to take place in Gaza until 2023. And it's just keep back the resistance to a level which we are able to work with. This is the policy of the Israeli government. And so we have Operation Cast Lead, which took place in December 2008 until January 2009. This was called Operation Cast, led by the Israeli military, by the resistance. It was called Ma'arakat al-Furqan. And in this, there were over 1,400 Palestinians were killed, over 100,000 were made homeless, and this came after the blockade, the initial blockade of Gaza. Thereafter, we covered the Mavi Marmara, which many of you will remember, the ships, the flotilla that went to break the siege and the blockade of Gaza. And from when the ships were boarded by the IDF, there were 9 Turks activists were killed, Turkish activists were killed. Others were taken into detention for a while before they were released to their countries. Thereafter, we had in October 2011, which was seen as a victory by all the Palestinians, where eventually the soldier who had been kidnapped 5 years earlier in 2006, Gilad Shalit, he was exchanged for 1,027 Palestinian prisoners. And this was called by the Palestinians as Safqat Wafa al-Ahrar, loyalty to the free. And so this was seen as a big victory for the Palestinians, as many prisoners, some who had spent over 20-25 years in Israeli prisons, were released. Thereafter, we had in 2012, we had Pillar of Defense or Pillar of Cloud, another operation named by the Israeli forces. The resistance called it Ma'arakat al-Hijar al-Sijil, or the stones of clay, or of baked clay. And in there again, there were 174 Palestinians were killed. There was a massacre of the Daru family in the home. 10 members of the family were killed. The media tower, where the media offices were based, that was attacked. And also Ahmed al-Ja'bari, who was one of the leaders of the Islamic resistance movement, armed wing, known for developing the rockets, etc., and the tunnels, he was also assassinated during this operation. And in this operation specifically, the operation was quite short. It only lasted a week. It lasted a week, and the border crossing between Egypt and Gaza during this operation was not closed, and the citizens or the Palestinians in Gaza were able to cross the border, and aid and movement of goods continued during this week and during this period. Also during this specific offensive, the Israeli military did not target a single masjid. Whereas previously we have covered that many masajid were hit in Operation Kaslet, for example, in 2008-9, and in all of the consequent wars. If you remember, at this point in 2012, Morsi was the president of Egypt. So moving on to today, we'll cover from 2012 onwards. So what we had was in 29th of November 2012, the Palestinian state was given non-member observer status. So non-member observer status at the United Nations. So this was seen as a victory by the Palestinian Authority, that they have now got a seat in the United Nations, not as a member, but they are able to observe what takes place officially through a UN resolution. This was in November 2012. As a response, the Israeli government, they condemned the UN decision. They then seized 120 million US dollars of tax revenue of the Palestinian Authority. So as we discussed before, the Palestinians pay taxes. They pay the taxes to the Israeli government. The Israeli authorities thereafter hand over, after taking their cut, the portion to the Palestinian Authority. So they confiscated 120 million US dollars. And at that point, the Palestinian Authority had a lack of funds because of what had taken place previously. And also they enacted the E1 expansion plan. So the E1 expansion plan was basically cutting off East Jerusalem, so Al-Quds Al-Sharqiyya, from the rest of the West Bank. So East Jerusalem was completely cut off from the rest of the West Bank. Also increased the number of settlers in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank. The West Bank was also split into a further 2 cantons. So we also already said that it was split into about 3. It was further split into 2 separate places and now people in the West Bank, they could not move between these areas, nor could they go to East Jerusalem without permission, and nor could the people from East Jerusalem go anywhere in the West Bank without permission. So their movement, etc., was all curtailed. Thereafter, due to US pressure, in July 2013, the peace talks started again. Now, we said that initially the peace talks sort of fizzled out during the Al-Aqsa Intifada, or at the beginning of the Intifada Al-Aqsa. And thereafter nothing much took place. In 2010 there was a bit of discussions, but nothing really serious. Now there was pressure in 2013, and so talks took place. John Kerry from the US Secretary of State with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the President of the PA Mahmoud Abbas. And so they have discussions, and part of the discussions was a Jordan Valley proposal. And this proposal was that the Jordan Valley would be given to the Palestinians, and they would have a border crossing with Jordan, and that would mean that the Palestinians would have a state with a border with another country. They would not be completely surrounded by Israeli forces, as all previous proposals were, and they would have a border crossing and a border with Jordan. This was totally rejected. In fact, the parliament put through a bill and affirmed the bill in the Israeli Knesset that this giving the Jordan Valley over to the Palestinians is something which can never happen. And also settlements were not discussed on this in this issue. There was proposals put forward that settlements would be reduced, etc. Illegal settlers would not be allowed. This was also rejected. In fact, in January, so it started in July, they continued all the way in December 2013 into 2014. In January 2014, Netanyahu authorized the building of 1,400 new settlement homes in the West Bank while the talks were still going on. So he was basically derailing the whole peace process and the talks that were going on. Also, there was supposed to be a prisoner release or prisoner swap of 104 Palestinian prisoners as a goodwill gesture who were being held in administrative detention, most of them by the Israeli government, in order for the peace talks to continue. So they released a number of them, and then they stopped and they said, we're not going to release anymore, as per the agreement when they were supposed to release all of them. They also put in blockades and continue to restrict the movement of the Palestinians moving around inside the West Bank. During this period, there was internal pressure on the Palestinians that there should be a unity government, and the different parties, even though they had differences of opinion and they didn't agree on all issues, but the different parties said that, or wished that they would all unite, and so there would be a united Palestinian leadership. And so a Palestinian unity government was agreed on the 23rd of April 2014. And so Hamas and Fatah, they agreed to form a unity government, and they went on, and the agreement was that within 5 weeks they'd form a unity government, the positions would all be agreed, and by the end of the year there would be elections. So this unity government was sort of decided and agreed upon. The Israeli government responded by immediately suspending the peace talks. So they completely suspended the peace talks. So this whole peace talks had been taken on for 1 year. They came to an end. Thereafter, they put economic sanctions on the Palestinian Authority. Why? Because they said that they are now working with terrorists, so we cannot discuss with them. They also, Benjamin Netanyahu also said that I will not discuss with Mahmoud Abbas or the Palestinian Authority anything with regards to the peace process until they recognize the state of Israel. Now, obviously this was a false statement, because the Palestinian Authority and Fatah had already recognized Israel all the way back in 1993 as part of the Oslo Accords number 1. So he was making a statement which they had already done. But then he also put restrictions. So the government also put restrictions on the movement of Palestinians. They couldn't go to visit their relatives, they couldn't go to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa without passes. And this continues until today. And so they put a lot of restrictions and checkpoints all throughout the West Bank for restricting the movement of the Palestinians in and around. In fact, even the president of the PA, so Mahmoud Abbas, he cannot move around without the permission of the Israeli authorities. So, for example, on the 7th of October, he was in Jordan. He was not allowed to return back to Ramallah or back to the West Bank without the permission of the Israeli authorities, and they would determine whether he would be allowed to come by road or whether he would be coming by helicopter and be flown in, or by plane. So even the movement of the leaders of the Palestinian Authority and the political leaders, the ones who are involved in the peace talks, were all restricted by the Israeli administration. And during this period, obviously, once the 2012 war came to an end, there was a peace agreement. The peace agreement was that the Palestinians in Gaza would have all of the land that belonged to them. They would be able to use it. They would be able to plow in the fields all the way up to the border of Gaza, despite there being a wall or a fence across all the parts of Gaza. And the Israeli army will not attack anyone who is working in their field or in their lands. Part of it was also that there would not be a blockade on Gaza, that aid would be allowed in, and also business would be able to take place through the multiple borders that they are, meaning imports and exports. Also, the Palestinians living in Gaza would get work permits to work, whether it be in the Israeli state territory or whether it be in the West Bank, and they would be able to travel through. And obviously there would be no violence and attacks, etc. During this period, the Israeli armed forces, they fired into Gaza at the farmers who were working in the lands 63 times. There were 13 incursions they entered into the Gaza Strip. They attacked fishermen 30 times, and this was all within the first 3 months. This was all within the first 3 months after the agreement in 2012. The blockade of Gaza continued, and they did not allow imports, they did not allow exports. Exports were completely banned. They did not allow imports of any construction material. And so, after all the devastation and destruction that took place after the war, construction material is not allowed in, so that they cannot rebuild what has been destroyed. They introduced buffer zones, which, as we said, the Palestinians were supposed to be allowed to plow in all the fields. They introduced buffer zones so that any person from Gaza cannot come towards or even close to the wall. They will be shot at. And as we said, they blocked many goods coming in. And during this period, 1 Israeli soldier was killed, 11 Palestinians were killed, and 5 Israelis were injured, and over 81 Palestinians were injured during this period. So you can see that the violations of the ceasefire varied greatly between the two sides. In fact, during the whole period of 2013, there were maybe only 55 rockets fired in response to Israeli attacks on Gaza and on Palestinians, and the deaths of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, as compared to the following year. For example, in 2014, there were hundreds within a space of few months because of the breakdown of the ceasefire. In fact, according to some of the reports, those rockets in 2014 were not fired by Hamas, but they were fired by, for example, the other groups in Gaza, like Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the other groups who are in Gaza at the time, who are in Gaza and active in Gaza. So this was 2012 coming up to 2014. Thereafter, we have the conflicts continuing in Gaza. In the West Bank, things are almost, you could say, at a standard status. The Palestinians, occasionally they carry out some kind of resistance, but it's controlled by the Palestinian Authority, and so it is very difficult for the Palestinians in the West Bank to do any kind of attacks against Israeli targets or do any kind of physical resistance. At the same time, the Israeli forces are continuously carrying out raids in the West Bank. So from the West Bank, it's very difficult. Therefore, it's a continuous cycle in the West Bank. The Israeli carries out raids, evict people from their homes, destroy homes, build new settlements, and maybe there's a firing or a stabbing, or a Palestinian tries to get a car to run over, for example, some soldiers at an Israeli checkpoint, etc., or some settlers. But this is the same cycle that continues within the West Bank. In Gaza, because the Palestinians are in one block of land surrounded, they have bouts of violence or escalations or wars or battles. So eventually in 2014, you have in the 8th of July to the 26th of August, you have another operation carried out by the Israeli military. They call it Operation Protective Edge. The resistance movements in Gaza, they call it the withered grain, or at the end of Surah Al-Fil, معركة العصف المأكول. And so this starts off initially. So if you look at the Israeli narrative or the Western narrative, they say that this operation was carried out due to the abduction of 3 Israeli teenagers, and also rocket attacks by the Palestinian factions in Gaza on Israel. Now what that leaves out is that before this, in Baytuniya, in the West Bank, there were demonstrations taking place in the West Bank against Israeli occupation and eviction of Palestinians, etc. The standard difficulties that the Palestinians have to face on a daily basis. And as a result, as part of those demonstrations, a couple of Palestinian teenagers were shot. So a number of them were shot, 2 were killed, on age 15, 17. So after this, there was a huge investigation. So this was in May, so just a couple of months before. Now, as part of this investigation, initially the Israeli government refused any kind of responsibility. In fact, they said that these 2 individuals, or these 2 teenagers, they didn't even die. They weren't even killed. They said that this is a fabrication, that they are dead. Eventually, there was CCTV footage from a number of shops in the area. So a number of Palestinians in the area, they had CCTV on their shops. And so, just like we have CCTV here. And so they caught the whole incident on camera. So for example, one Palestinian in his shop, he had 6 hours of recordings of the whole protest, including when the live bullets were shot at the protesters. The protesters were protesting outside Sijin Ofa. So they were outside the prison with regards to the situation of and the conditions of the detainees who are held in administrative detention, which we'll come to later, by the Israeli government. So they were protesting for the prisoners. And there were a number of Israeli forces behind the prison walls, so behind 12-foot high walls, and the Palestinians were throwing stones. The soldiers responded with tear gas, with rubber bullets, and a few of them responded with live bullets. And so a number of Palestinians were injured, but these 2 teenagers were killed. So the whole video footage showed that there was no violence carried out at the time when these were killed. It was just a live shooting from the Israeli soldiers. In fact, when not even stones were being thrown. So eventually it came out that these 2 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli IDF soldiers. The IDF arrested the shopkeeper who had this footage, the CCTV footage, and had handed it over to the human rights organizations. He was tortured, he was beaten. They said, we're going to let the dogs kill your children and eat them alive, threatened, etc., because he handed over the footage to the human rights organizations, and he was tortured and beaten, etc., and until eventually he was sent back home. Eventually the Israeli government said that yes, they were shot by live fire, but he pressed the trigger by mistake. Anyway, so this took place first. Thereafter, 3 Israeli teenagers, aged 17 and 19, were taken by a group of fighters in the West Bank. the Israeli government accused Hamas, the Islamic resistance movement. Now, a number of Hamas leaders, they denied this incident. Then one of the groups or cells, they claimed of Hamas, they claimed that they have abducted the 3 teenagers. Anyway, they demanded that there would be a prisoner exchange, as has happened with Gilad Shalit. The teenagers would be handed over to the Israelis, and the Israelis would hand over Palestinian prisoners. The Israelis eventually, they found out who was holding the prisoners through their spies, etc., and informants in the West Bank, and so they went to carry out an operation to arrest those individuals, and initially to save or bring back the 3 Israelis. However, the 3 Israelis were killed. They were found in a ditch, and the 2 main individuals from the Palestinians who were accused of carrying out this whole operation, they had a shootout with the Israeli forces, and they were both killed in the operation, and so they were unable to arrest them. So these events were leading up. Thereafter, in response, the Israeli authorities, they arrested over 350, according to some reports, up to 600 Palestinians in the West Bank because of this incident. So up to 600 Palestinians are arrested. As we said, the numbers differ. Some say 350, some say up to 600. And so they were arrested. In response, Hamas and the groups in Gaza, they fire rockets. As Palestinians are demonstrating, they are killed in the West Bank. In response, Israel launches Operation Protective Edge, and this was, you could say, one of the worst or most violent escalations that took place for decades. Over 2,300 Palestinians in Gaza were killed. 67 IDF soldiers were killed. We have over 10,000 Gazans and Palestinians in Gaza injured or wounded. We have 469 IDF soldiers were also wounded. So they entered into Gaza for a few days and they retreated. And 270,000 plus homes were destroyed or damaged. So that's a very large number of buildings. There were over 200 masajid, 220 factories, hundreds of shops and businesses, etc. were all damaged or completely destroyed during this period. And there was widespread destruction in Gaza. Eventually they come to an agreement, as always brokered through middle parties. Egypt is always a key broker in the middle, alongside the US on the side of Israel and Qatar, etc. Thereafter, in 2019, so then you have this break for a few years. There are a few escalations to whenever we have this break between 2014 and 2019, or between 2008 and 9 and 2012, it does not mean that there's no violence. All it means is that there's no large operation. However, the airstrikes will continue from time to time. There will be an incursion into Gaza, there will be shelling, etc. In the West Bank, things continue on a continuous basis. So in 2019, so this was a few days, 12th to the 14th of November, we had Operation Black Belt launched by the Israeli government. And this started off after the assassination of Baha Abu al-Ata. So Baha Abu al-Ata was the senior leader of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza. And he was killed, assassinated, after he returned back from Egypt for discussions on a long-term truce with Israel. And Hamas were already in talks with, not directly but indirectly through intermediaries through Egypt, to have a slightly long-term truce with Israel so that they can guarantee the rights of the Palestinians in the current territories which the Palestinians reside in. And we discussed this before, where they proposed, for example, a 10-year truce or a 15-year truce, 25-year truce, even up to 50 years, where the Palestinians will have their full rights and they will not be attacked by either side until closer to the time where each side can then discuss, or the Palestinians will then decide whether they want to carry on with this agreement or change the agreement. So they were in talks. This was the first time where the Israeli authorities targeted only non-Hamas members, and so they targeted Baha Abu al-Ata in Gaza. At the same time, they targeted Akram al-Ajuri in Syria, in Damascus. So he was residing in Damascus. So in Gaza, they bombed the apartment block, or the flat that the apartment that Baha was staying in. He was killed alongside his wife and all of his children. In Damascus, they bombed the apartment of Akram al-Ajuri. However, he survived, but his wife, his family was injured, his son was killed, as well as a couple of others were killed. But he survived the attack. As a response to this attack, rockets were fired by the PIJ, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, to Israel, and this ended up in a back and forth of rockets and bombings in Gaza, launched by Israel as Operation Black Belt, and 34 Palestinians were killed, 111 were wounded, and Hamas abstained from participating in this confrontation. Thereafter, we have 2021. So from the 8th to the 21st of May 2021, we have a larger escalation. So on the 27th of Ramadan, so we have escalations that we've seen over the past few years, where the Israeli forces, they enter into Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa in the month of Ramadan. And for all of you who follow, you see this every single year over the past few years. Now they enter into Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa in the month of Ramadan, inside the masjid that's inside the musalla that's at the Qibla, where everyone is performing salah or doing i'tikaf. And so in 2021, they entered on the 8th of Ramadan, which coincided as the on the 8th of May, which coincided with the 27th of Ramadan. The 27th of Ramadan. And so this was obviously where you have the largest number of people, possibility of being Laylatul Qadr. And so the number of people there was very great. They entered inside, and there were clashes. Palestinians threw stones to disperse the soldiers, etc. The soldiers came inside. A number of Palestinians were killed, wounded, etc. And at the same time, there was the enforced evictions from Sheikh al-Jarrah, from the neighborhood of Sheikh al-Jarrah by Al-Aqsa in East or Sharq al-Quds, East Jerusalem. And those of you who remember at that time, there were clashes between the Palestinians who were residing in the Al-Jarrah neighborhood and the Israeli forces who were trying to forcefully evict them from their homes. And the reason was they wanted to evict them and thereafter bring in Israeli settlers. Eventually, the forces or the resistance forces in Gaza, the different factions in Gaza, they give an ultimatum. They give an ultimatum that the Israeli forces by the 10th, so on the 8th they give an ultimatum that by the 10th the Israeli forces must retreat from Al-Aqsa, they must retreat from Al-Jarrah, or else on the 10th they will be attacked. And this long period wherein there have been no attack or rocket attacks by the Palestinian factions on Israeli targets will come to an end. The Israeli authorities just ignored this ultimatum. So on the 10th of May, the rocket attacks start from Gaza. In response, Israel then starts the bombardment of Gaza in Ramadan, carrying on through Eid. And in this bombardment, over 250 Palestinians are killed. In this one, there is an escalation also in the West Bank. So a number of Palestinians are killed during this period in the West Bank, and over 3,500 Palestinians are injured. 2,000 of them, just over 2,000 in Gaza, and the others are injured in the West Bank, over 1,500. And eventually, again, as always, they come to some agreement on the 21st of May, and the hostilities come to an end. They agree that there will be no attacks, cross-border attacks from both sides. The blockade will be lifted, etc. In all of these different operations that take place, the demands from the Palestinian factions are very basic and simple. Or from both sides, let's say. The Israeli authorities say they want no rocket attacks, and they want any Israeli that has been captured to be returned back. And they want no attacks, and they want complete demilitarization of all of the Palestinian territories. In response, the Palestinian factions and the Palestinian resistance, they all say that we want, number one, the removal of the blockade of Gaza. Number two, the Palestinians who are being held in Israeli prisons should be released. Number three, there can be no attacks by Israeli forces unilaterally on any kind of Palestinian target. Number four, there should be independence for the Palestinians, and the Palestinians should be able to rule their own land and have freedom in the areas which they control. So these are basically the ruling, and also that Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and the east of Jerusalem is for the Muslims or the Palestinians, and it should not be a zone which is controlled by the Israeli forces. And this is the same demand that is put forward every single time there is a round of violence. Thereafter, after 2021 comes to an end, again there are sporadic rocket attacks cross border. Things are calm until the 7th of October. And then on the 7th of October, the attack or cross-border attack on Israeli targets takes place, and thereafter the Israeli attacks on Gaza, which continues until today, 154 days. Today is the 154th day. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the current round of events. Israel has launched an operation called Swords of Iron. The Palestinian factions have launched an operation called Tufan al-Aqsa, or Al-Aqsa Flood, and this is ongoing since the 7th of October. I'm sure all of you are following the news since then, so there's no need to go into detail with regards to this specific operation or what took place from the start until now. But in brief, obviously, once things did not start, as they always say, on the 7th of October. On the 6th of October, the Israeli authorities, they banned the import of donkeys into Gaza. On the 6th of October, day before, they banned the import of donkeys into Gaza. The fuel in Gaza was short. People were not able to move around. They were using donkeys for basic transport. You know how we use the cars and to move around and to move goods. We use trucks and vans. Well, they can't use the trucks and vans because the sellers don't have the money to afford the fuel, or there is no fuel. And so they transport the goods from their fields, for example, to the market by donkey, and goods to their homes by donkey. The sale of or the import of donkeys was banned on the 6th of October. So the Palestinians cannot transport anything in Gaza. Not only are vehicles banned, but donkeys are also banned. Anyway, so this violence continues until today. We ask that Allah Azza wa Jal lift the oppression from our brothers and sisters in Gaza and around Al-Aqsa and in Al-Sham and the rest of the world. So during this, obviously, these are the military operations. We'll now discuss the political events that took place during this period. So we have a number of events. So for example, on the 15th of December 2016, on the 15th of December 2016, we have the assassination of Muhammad al-Zawari in Tunisia. So Muhammad al-Zawari was an engineer, Tunisian engineer, and he was a senior academic in Tunisia. However, at the same time, he had traveled to Syria and he had contacted the Islamic resistance movement in Gaza in order to assist them. So he was a leading aviation engineer or unmanned aerial vehicle engineer, so drone engineer in Tunisia, and he was working on a number of projects with his students at the university. But at the same time, he was the leader of the drone project for the Al-Qasim brigades, and he developed the first drone or unmanned aerial vehicle called Ababil number 1 in 2014, which was used in the 2014 war that took place. Eventually, his details, etc., and ID was uncovered by the Israeli intelligence, and so with a drive-by shooting, he was killed and assassinated in Tunisia on the 15th of December 2016. They also removed the CCTV from a local shop that had coverage of the area before the agents left. Only after his assassination was it made public that he had actually been working with the groups in Gaza, but it had not been known previously. So he had traveled a number of times and had provided them with the development of their drone projects. Thereafter, in May 2018, well, slightly before that, while Obama is the president of the US, a UN resolution is passed where the US abstains, and they don't veto the resolution, nor do they vote against the resolution. And the resolution condemns the building or expansion of settlements in the West Bank. So this is the first time that the US has allowed this resolution to be passed through the Security Council. There was condemnation from the Israeli authorities and the Israeli government, not just the UN, but to the actions of the US government. But they said it's no problem because we will soon have an ally in Trump coming into the White House, even though Obama has stabbed us in the back. And so within a short period of time, Obama ceases to become the president of the US, and Trump becomes the president of the US. And at this point, he becomes the president. He moves the US embassy, which was in Tel Aviv, he moves it to Jerusalem. He moves it to Jerusalem and declares that the US recognizes Jerusalem or Al-Quds as the capital of the Israeli state. As a response to the UN resolution, Netanyahu and the Israeli government, they also authorized the building of over 4,000 new settlement homes in the West Bank as a response to the UN resolution condemning the settlements, expansion of settlements, etc. And so this takes place in May 2018. This then leads to what was known as the Great March of Return. The Great March of Return. So this starts on the 30th of March, on Jumu'ah, on the day of Friday, 30th of March 2018. And it lasts for over a year and 8 months, all the way until 27th of December 2019. And during this period, every Friday, the Palestinians, they come out in Gaza and they march, nothing else. They walk across by the wall and the border between Gaza and the Israeli perimeter wall and fence, demanding a number of things. 3 main demands. One was in condemnation of the moving of the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of the Israeli state, and that it should be capital of the Palestinian state. Number 2, the Great March of Return points to the right of the return of the Palestinians who were made refugees and had to leave their homes in 1948. And this refers back to the UN Resolution 242, 243, which we covered, which gives the Palestinians, who are called the 1948 Palestinians, who are originally from the 500 villages and towns that's in now the established Israeli state. And also that the blockade of the Palestinians should be lifted and the Palestinians should receive their rights. So these are the 3 main demands by the marchers in Gaza. And you had over 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 Palestinians every single week marching all the way until this point. Now the Israeli forces, they clamped down on these protests or these marches by tear gas, with rubber bullets, with live fire, until you had 223 Palestinians or more were killed and over 9,200 Palestinians injured. And this was not a military operation, this was just protests in the lands of Gaza. Thereafter we have in February 2019, you have the Warsaw Conference. This conference is a Western Arab alliance against Iranian influence. And so you have the United States, you have the Arabian countries, we have the UK, we have the European Union, and Israel, all of them, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, participating in this conference in Poland. And the discussion that takes place, or the agreement that takes place, is that they all will ally with each other against Iranian influence in the Middle East, specifically and generally in all the different regions. And from there is Palestine and Gaza and the West Bank. So this is you could say the first open, direct relations between the general Arab countries and the Israeli administration. Thereafter, soon, in February 2020, we have the agreement with Sudan. So we have Netanyahu and Abdel Fattah al-Burhani, who is the leader of one of the two factions in Sudan. So there are two factions in Sudan. One of the factions is supported by the UAE and Israel, and the other faction is supported by different parties. So this is the party that's supported by Israel. So this is Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Netanyahu. They meet, they have a discussion in Uganda, and they come to an agreement with regards to recognition of Israel and the rights of Israel, while Israel is providing them with funds and support and etc. in the civil war that's taking place in Sudan, wherein many of our brothers and sisters are being killed. And this is not the first interference. Now, as part of this agreement, before I come to the interference, as part of this agreement, the Israeli Air Force, the IAF, is given permission to fly over or fly in Sudan airspace. And so Israeli airplanes start to fly in the airspace of Sudan. Now coming back to the interference. So this is interference in Sudan, causing an increase in the civil war and the killing of Muslims and Arabs in Sudan. Previous to this, in the 90s, again there was an involvement by Israel and a few other countries in one of the African islands, in the island of Zanzibar, and they also funded mercenaries from other parts of Africa and using propaganda against the Arabs who are living in Zanzibar and the Africans who are living in Zanzibar and the Indian migrants in Zanzibar, causing friction between them until eventually 12,000 Arab migrants in Zanzibar, Muslim Arabs, were killed in the 1990s due to this involvement and incitement by Israel and other Western countries, including the UK. In any case, so there was involvement in other countries also, because Zanzibar was key in terms of the Suez Canal and the borders in Africa close to the Israeli land, you could say. And the Arabs, or the Arab government who was in power before this uprising was instigated, they were in favor of the rights of the Palestinians and the Palestinian resistance against Israeli occupation. Anyway, coming back, thereafter we have in 2020, again in 2020 on the 13th of August, we have the Abraham Accords. And so these accords, they are an agreement between Israel and first the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, thereafter following on from them Bahrain, and they agree that they will recognize mutual recognition, so recognition of the State of Israel, the right of the State of Israel to exist, the right of the state to peace and security, and collaboration on anti-terror matters. So anyone who is working against the State of Israel and against the security of the State of Israel. So this is what in the Arabic language was called the start of tatbi', or the normalization of ties by Arab governments with the Israeli administration. Now, on this note, it has already started previously, which we discussed. The Egyptian government, Jordan initially, thereafter the Egyptian government, and thereafter those who came later on, but initially starting off with Jordan and Egypt. Now this was formalized with a number of other countries, so UAE, Bahrain. Thereafter there was discussions with a number of other countries, including Oman. Discussions were ongoing and continue to go on with Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region also, to normalize ties with the Israeli government, because officially the Arab countries until very recently had not recognized the state of Israel as a state, and it had not recognized its right to exist. And so this was in terms of the political matters that took place during this period until now. Obviously, after the start of the current operation and escalation in hostilities, the normalization has been put on the back burner, and although discussion continues, however, no decisions are able to be taken at this point in time due to the escalation, especially by the Arab states, due to the a large reason is the public opinion against such decisions, or against such normalization of ties with the Israeli government at such a point in time. So carrying on from this, inshallah, we'll cover a few other things. This covers all the events until now, inshallah ta'ala. Obviously not everything, but in brief, as much as we can. Inshallah, now we'll just briefly cover the situation of the Palestinians in their normal day-to-day life. Generally what they have to face we've covered, but we haven't covered what they go through in terms of arrest, imprisonment, and what they go through in terms of the prison process, or the legal, if you can say legal, process by the Israeli government. So the prisons or the arrests are split into two types. There's administrative detention, and then there are military trials. So there are no, you could say, criminal trials in that case, in that sense of the word. It's either military or administrative detention. Administrative detention is basically where Palestinians are imprisoned without charge. So the Israeli forces can arrest a Palestinian, put them into prison, bring no charges. They just say for the security of the state. There may be hidden evidence, but nobody will ever know what it is, if there is anything. But they don't even have to claim hidden evidence. They can say, for the security of the state, we have administratively detained this individual. And this lasts initially for 6 months, and thereafter they can on a rolling basis continue to keep these individuals detained. Continue to keep them detained. It can be done on an indefinite basis. At some points there are over 1,000 Palestinians administratively detained administratively. In fact, on the October 7th, there was over 1,300 Palestinians who were detained in administrative detention. No charges, nothing. Thereafter, there were over 5,000 Palestinian prisoners who were held on charges. Now, Palestinians, when they're taken to court, they're not charged under any kind of normal criminal law. They're charged under military rule, under military law. So even though the Israeli government will say that they are technically in charge, and therefore they can't charge them legally under military laws, according to the international law, they have to be charged under criminal law. But they are charged as if they are combatants of an enemy state. And how the process works is that the Israeli government will arrest an individual. This individual will then be taken into interrogation. No access to a lawyer, no access to family, friends, communication, nothing. The individual is arrested. The individual is then taken to a closed location and put inside interrogation cells. Thereafter, he is interrogated using enhanced techniques of interrogation. Generally what they have is, the child's chair that you have in school, small chair. So they give a chair like that, either with a back or without a back. The Palestinian is then chained. Now that position for an adult is difficult in and of itself. His legs are chained and his hands are chained behind his back. And thereafter, they carry out all kinds of torture, waterboarding, pushing him back. Sometimes they will continue to interrogate an individual continuously for days. So for example, one of the prisoners who was freed in 2011, he says that he was interrogated continuously for 6 days. For 6 days, continuously in that chair. The interrogators get tired, so one comes and he's replaced by another, until those 3 days, for example, are up. And he does not move from that chair. He does not move from that chair. They will beat him. They will. Many of the Palestinians who go through this, their bones are broken. They end up going to the hospital. They end up with permanent injuries, permanent disabilities. Some of them have become blind. Some of them have lost limbs. And this is just the first initial interrogation process. For some Palestinians, the interrogation process takes up to 6 months. 6 months. And some longer. Thereafter, the Palestinian, based on what they, and this is just part of the torture process. Sometimes they are hung from the ceiling. They are hung with their toes touching the ground. And if they were to move or relax, they will die because the rope is strangling around their neck. Or they will be hung with chains, cuffed with their hands and chained with their legs, hovering in midair for days. During this period, they're not allowed food. One of the prisoners, he says that I was drifting off. It's been 2 days, no food, nothing to consume, and continuous interrogation. So I drift off. I might as well go to sleep. They're beating me, they're asking me, I'm not going to give them any information. And so they stop me. They stop me by throwing freezing cold water, or by boiling hot water, or by loud music, rock, metal, heavy metal, loud sounds, etc. Not allowed. And this continues for months. Some for a shorter period, some for a longer period. There have been hundreds of Palestinians who have died after arrest. Palestinians who had absolutely no health issues previously, they enter into they are arrested by the Israeli authorities, and then the Israeli authorities say that this is the body of your family member, he died. After this period of interrogation, they are then allowed to speak to they are then taken to court first. And the court, then there is a trial, and the court then judges in their case. Now, when the court judges in their case, it takes place maybe, sometimes it takes place immediately, sometimes a few months down the line, sometimes it's ongoing. However, the ruling that is going to be made by the judge is not a ruling which is decided by a jury or by the judge. The judge sentences the Palestinian based on what he has been told to sentence the Palestinian on by the Israeli intelligence forces. So they tell the judge, sentence him with this, so they will sentence him on that. There is nothing that a Palestinian can do by bringing any kind of lawyer into the courtroom to defend his case. There has never been in the whole history, since 1948 until 2023, where a Palestinian has been found not guilty in any court case. Since 1948 until 2023, no Palestinian has ever been found not guilty. So the court case is just a farce. So they are, based on what they are going to be sentenced with, they are then placed into cells. So cells are of a number of types, but you could generally say 2 types of cells. You have cells where a number of Palestinians are placed together, so a group of Palestinians placed inside a room, and then you have cells which are solitary confinement. Cells where the Palestinians are placed together, this has pros and cons. So the pros are they are with some of their own brothers, people of their own mindset. Generally the prisons, initially they used to be mixed of all the different factions, etc. But after a number of efforts by the Palestinians and resistance and hunger strikes, etc., they now have the rooms in the prisons are designated based on the faction of the Palestinian group. So for example, the group of the Islamic resistance movement, all their members will be in one cell or in each cell. They won't have mixed different groups, because obviously they are in their prison cells for a very long time. And if people have different opinion, and they're sleeping literally touching the person next to them 24 hours a day for years, they're going to talk. And if they talk about different things, it can end up in confrontation. For example, some factions and members, they do not smoke. Members of other factions, they are chain smokers, and they are living inside a small tiny room. It's unbearable. Like for those who don't smoke, if they were to just spray or stand next to somebody who smokes, it's difficult for a short period of time. Imagine living in the room continuously, which has maybe one small opening somewhere, if that, on a continuous basis, and the person has to smoke inside the room. Although also all of the prisoners in the cell, so part of the pros, is that they have other individuals in the cell. They're able to communicate with each other. They're able to talk to each other, etc. Assist each other if needed. However, the cons are the rooms are usually overcrowded, so there's not much space for anybody to do anything. Also, they have maybe one toilet for everyone inside that room. Sometimes there may be 18 people inside a room, sometimes 20 people inside a small cramped room, everyone on bunks. And so it's a cramped place, and they stay there for years. And they're allowed out 1 hour a day. 1 hour a day they're allowed out. These are the cells where you have multiple members. Then you have solitary confinement. The prisoners who the Israeli government deems dangerous, they are placed in solitary confinement. Now, solitary confinement is not a room like we think. No, the prisons or the cells in these sections or these wings of the different prisons, they are very small. So there will be space for a bed or space for two single beds. That's it. So it's like a box room like we have in this country. I was talking to some brothers from France. They said in France a room is not regarded as a room unless it's 3 meters by 3 meters. Yeah. So if a landlord was to rent a home to you, and he said it's a 3-bedroom house, but one of the rooms was less than 3 by 3, you can challenge him and make a claim against him that he's given you a house which only has 2 rooms, not 3, because the third room is less than 3 by 3. We don't have that here. You might get 1 by 2, it's still counted as a room. So there they have it, approximately 2 meters by 2 meters. That's the space that he has. Sometimes he's given a toilet, sometimes there may not be a toilet inside the room. The room doesn't have any windows. There are ants, cockroaches, flies, mosquitoes, rats, mice, all inside that room. Sometimes they have no lights, no electricity, nothing inside that room. The door is a solid metal door with 3 openings. One face height, so that the Israeli guards or the prison guards can open and have a look at the prisoner, or to give through some food. Second, they have an opening approximately mid-waist. This is for the prisoner to go to the door every time any Israeli soldier wants to come inside the room, or for him to leave the room, he has to go to the door, he has to turn around, place both his hands by that opening, and his hands are chained. Thereafter, there's an opening at the bottom of the door, and that is opened, and then his legs are chained. And this will happen to the prisoner maybe 5 to 6 times a day. Maybe 5 to 6 times a day. They come inside to take him out for a break for 1 hour every day. It happens at that time. Now during his break, he is allowed out inside a small compound, but even in that compound, he is chained by his hands and with his legs. But despite that, the Palestinian prisoners still do exercise. They run with their legs chained and their hands chained behind their backs. They perform salah, chained in that manner. In fact, in one of the incidents, one of the prisoners, he says, I was very happy because at that point, because of the overcrowding of the amount of prisoners, they had put 2 of us inside this solitary confinement cell. Imagine 2 inside a 2 meters by 2 meters. And he said, and this had 2 sections. So outside in the recess area, there were two areas. There was a wall in between, so we can't see the brothers on that side, and we are on this side. However, there were four of us, so we decided that for the first time in over a decade, I will perform Salatul Jumu'ah. Imagine, for the first time in over a decade, I will perform Salatul Jumu'ah, four of us. But we are banned from performing Jumu'ah. So they told one of the brothers that you give the khutbah from behind the wall, and I will be on this side of the wall, we will be sitting on this side listening, and you two on that side. And so he gave the khutbah. They told him to be short, but he went long. And so the guards came and asked him, and they just said, oh, he's just giving a dars, a lesson, so they let him be. They didn't realize that he was doing Jumu'ah. So he said this was the first time in over a decade where I paid Jumu'ah. But that is with his hand chained behind his back and his legs chained. And so this happens on a daily basis. They strip them naked almost on a daily basis to search them. And this is for the prisoners. Many of the prisoners don't see their families. Some of the prisoners, one prisoner, he was married while he was in prison. So he was arrested in 1997, and he's still in prison. He's remained in prison. He got married in 2011. We are in now 2024. He spent majority of that time in solitary confinement all the way until 2013, etc. But he, after his marriage, until today, he still hasn't seen his wife, because they don't recognize the marriage, and so even though he's holding on through the official documentation, however, she's not allowed to visit him. He saw his parents for the first time after 15 years. His mother, another prisoner who's been in the prison for over 20 years, he saw his father and his mother for half an hour once in 20 years. His children, he saw his children maybe 4 times over a space of a couple of years, where they were allowed visits in 20 years. That's it. Many of the Palestinian prisoners are not allowed visitors, especially when they are in solitary confinement. Then they have the transport. The whole transport of the Palestinian prisoners is also a punishment and a torture, an abuse. So they will take them inside like a minibus, but it's completely metal. From the outside it looks fine, but inside is a metal shell, and they have metal benches, and every single prisoner is chained, and then they have solitary cubicles for those prisoners who are in solitary confinement. And when they transport them, they transport prisoners from different prisons at the same time. So they will collect prisoner from this prison, then they'll go to the next one, then they'll go to the next one, then they'll go to the next one. And so the trip from the prison to the courthouse, so this is usually when they go to the courthouse, the trip, or if they're moving prisons from one prison to another, the trip takes maybe 16 hours sometimes, 13 hours, maybe 17 hours, 18 hours, and they're tied up in there. They're not allowed to use the bathroom. They're not allowed to speak. They're not allowed to move, chained in that one position. They call it the coffin of the living, the transport vehicle. And for many of the prisoners, what they do is they move them often. So no prisoner can ever become comfortable in the cell that he is in. So imagine he is in one cell, after a few months they'll move him, after a few months they'll move him. One of the prisoners, for example, has been in solitary confinement since October. He has moved in during this period through over 5 different prisons in solitary confinement, just in 5 months, or in 4 months actually. This report was about a few weeks ago. So in 4 months he was moved 5 different prisons in solitary confinement. They place them sometimes in solitary confinement where they are the only sane individual, and you have maybe 9 or 10 other prisoners, and they are all crazy. They are all crazy, and they scream and shout and swear all day and all night. All day and all night. And this is enough. Many Palestinians have been driven to insanity because of the situation that they are in. And then this is the men. The women also go through the same thing. The honor of our sisters is violated. Children, their honor is violated. Their children here, I don't want to go into any details. In the prisons, you will have known the incidents that have taken place just recently of the sisters who were arrested from Gaza or taken from Gaza. However, the Palestinians, they have, and generally the Muslims, especially in the Arab world, they have honor for their sisters. They have ghayrah, protective honor for their sisters. May Allah also give us Muslims in the West the same kind of protective honor. So, for example, one of the sisters, one of the prisoners whose mother had come to visit. Now, visits are also a torture. So the individuals who come to visit, they have to go through a process which takes them hours, a whole day, just to reach the prison to see their son or their husband or their child for half an hour. So they only allowed half an hour visit. But for that, they have to travel maybe 12 hours. They leave the West Bank, for example, and they have to go through a full search and everything in the West Bank. They are taken in one vehicle. Then to cross the border into the Israeli state, they have to go through another check, and they have to continue to go through checkpoints and checks all the way until they reach the prison. Thereafter, they go through another search there before they are allowed in. And then once they go in, the prisoners are behind the screen. The prisoners are behind the screen, and they are not allowed to touch. They are not allowed to. The mother cannot hug her child. The child cannot touch the mother or the father or even kiss their foreheads. They have to speak to them from behind the screen. Although one of the prisoners, who's now been in prison for 26 years, he said that after over 15 years, when I saw my mother for the first time, she had become an old woman, and I also had grown old, and she came to meet me. The barrier that had been placed there had been left unlocked, and so as soon as I sat down, she had noticed. So as soon as I sat down, she grabbed the barrier, even though she was an old woman, and pushed the whole barrier up, leaned through, and gave me a hug. This was the only time I have touched my mother in 26 years. But the difficulties that they face in just going to see their family members who are in prison, the family members who are imprisoned, they sometimes tell their own elderly parents or their family members, do not come to visit us. Do not come to visit us, because it puts them through too much trouble. So one of the family members, the sister of one of the prisoners, or the mother of one of the prisoners, was coming to visit her child, and when she entered the prison, at the entrance of the prison, one of the senior guards of the prison, he ordered, or actually he took off the hijab of this sister, of this mother. He took off the hijab of this mother. So one of the prisoners, the prisoners, they did an uproar in the prison. However, one of the prisoners said, I will get this guard back. And so he did something which causes him to go into solitary confinement for a while, and thereafter he has to go and see this guard for punishment. And so intentionally he did something wrong, which he would be put in solitary confinement. Thereafter he was taken from solitary confinement to meet this general who had pulled off the scarf of the mother of one of the prisoners, and during this time he had made a sharpened metal object and had hidden it with him. As soon as he was inside the room with this guard, he lunged forward and he stabbed this Israeli general inside the prison. And this was the prisoner doing resistance against the prison guards inside the prison. But these incidents, the incidents of the prisons are many, but the situation of the Palestinians are very bleak inside the prison. From the prisoners, there are a number of notable prisoners in the prisons. For example, you have a number of prisoners who have still been held since before 1993. Since before 1993, they are still being held in Israeli prisons. There are prisoners in the Israeli prisons who are blind. There are prisoners who are in solitary confinement who are blind and also in wheelchairs, disabled, unable to move by themselves, but they're held in solitary confinement. You have the example of Nail al-Barghouthi. Nail al-Barghouthi is the longest serving political prisoner in the world. He has spent 44 years as a political prisoner in Israeli prisons. He's currently in his 44th year. He was released in 2011 as part of the exchange, but within a couple of years he was arrested again. You have Marwan al-Barghouthi. He's from Fatah. He has been in prison now for also a couple of decades. You have Hassan al-Salama. Hassan al-Salama has been in prison since 1997. And he's still in prison. Majority of the time he spent in solitary confinement. You have the prisoner who has been sentenced with the longest and the highest prison sentence probably ever in the history of man. His name is Abdullah al-Barghouthi, and he has been sentenced to 5,200 years and 67 life sentences. A life sentence in Israel is not like here, 20 years. Life sentence in Israel is 99.99 years. This is what they write. 100 years is more than life, but 99.99. So basically 100 years. So altogether he's sentenced to 11,900 years in prison. And he has been in prison since 2003. Majority of the time he has spent in solitary confinement, apart from a short period where he was allowed one visit by his father, who by that time had become blind and so could not see his own son, and his mother once his father passed away in January this year. Allah have mercy on him. So there are many prisoners such as these who are held in the prisons. Now, despite them being in prison, they continue with their work. Many of the prisoners have completed degrees while they're in prison. In fact, this prisoner, he has done he's done a master's, and he also done a PhD doctorate whilst in prison from a Moroccan university. As many of the prisoners, they study in the Hebrew university, they learn Hebrew and graduate in a number of different subjects. We have also the highest number of prisoners who write books are Palestinian prisoners, who authored books from prison, on record. Many Palestinians, in fact, over 10 Palestinian women have written books from prison. Women, sisters. And the number of men are many. And it is not easy for them to write the books from the prison. It's not like here we can write and have a book. No. There they have to smuggle everything they have written out of the prison. They have to smuggle it out using different ways. For example, they get a piece of paper, they wrap it up, then they wrap it up in nylon, and thereafter they put it in their mouth when they have a visitor or a lawyer. The lawyers are there in order for them to get facilities, etc. Then the lawyer swallows that piece of nylon, then with the paper inside, or with the letter inside it. They then go home, and once they relieve themselves, they take out this nylon because it doesn't get digested and it doesn't get thing. They wash it. They thereafter open the paper, and it has the letter or the book inside, page by page. Some of the prisoners have smuggled in miniature cameras with miniature devices, SD cards, smaller than the one you have in your phone, and they store the whole book by taking images of everything they have written, and thereafter smuggle these tiny memory cards out of the prison in order for their books to be published. It's not a simple process. Despite that, they have the highest number of books authored in prison is by Palestinian prisoners. In fact, one of the prisoners, the one who we just mentioned, Abdullah al-Barghouthi, has written 17 books in prison. 17 books he has authored in prison. He has his own publication company. And many others have written books also. So despite all of these difficulties, etc., they continue to work even from the prisons. However, in terms of them achieving freedom, the only hope that they can see is a prisoner exchange. And that's why we see all the way from early on in the history and the incidents that we discussed, that the Palestinian resistance has always, all the factions have always taken Israelis, captured Israelis, and thereafter demanded prisoner exchange in order to free the Palestinians from the Israeli prisons, because there is no other way that they see in order to free the prisoners from the Israeli prisons. That's why every time there is an Israeli captured by any of the Palestinian factions, their demand is a prisoner exchange, because they know what goes or what the prisoners in the Palestinian prisons go through. So for example, the leader of Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, who is famous in the news at the moment for being the leader of Hamas in Gaza, he was in Israeli prison since the 1980s. He spent 26 years in Israeli prisons. He was released in 2011. He wrote a book while he was in prison also, Ash-Shawk wal Qurunful, a thorn and a clove. It's a long book. Anyway, so he knows he was a leader of Hamas in the prison. So for example, when the negotiations for the release of Gilad Shalit was taking place, he was negotiating with the Israeli officers with regards to who will be released from the prisons. So they have a hierarchy inside the prisons also. Every single group has, each prison has its own leader, and then you have the general leader of all the prisons for the Palestinians, and then you have like a shura and a consultation between all of the different factions, the Palestinian factions in the prisons, who decide on what's happening with the affairs of all the Palestinians. And so the demand whenever any Israeli is taken is an exchange of prisoners in order for the Palestinians to release and free those who are still in prison. May Allah Azza wa Jal free all our brothers and sisters who are being held unjustly. So inshallah, to conclude, inshallah we can go through a couple of points. Inshallah ta'ala, it's been a slightly longer session today, but the hope to finish before the month of Ramadan. So first of all, reading. So a lot of people ask that, what can we do, where can we get information from, what can we read? So in terms of books, there are many books that can be referred to or read, but it's a matter of finding the correct books. Sometimes it's difficult to find a book which will cover the information which we want, or in the point of view which we want to see. Now, from the number of, or from the books that are available, you have this book here. I'll start with this book. So this is called A Brief History of Palestine by Brother Ismail Adam Patel of Leicester, of Friends of Al-Aqsa. I'm sure you are all aware of the organization and of Brother Ismail Adam Patel. May Allah Azza wa Jal reward him for all of his efforts and his sacrifice. So the book, I think this is in its second edition, published in 2019. So it covers up to the early part of 2019. Obviously, it doesn't cover everything in detail. Some of the points which I mentioned are not in there, etc. But generally, it covers the violations of the rights of the Palestinians by the Israeli authorities in, you could say, good detail until this point, until 2019. Thereafter, you have a number of books also in the English language. So we have by Rashid Al-Khalidi. It's called The 100 Years War on Palestine. The 100 Years War on Palestine. This book was published in 2007. So it's written by Rashid Khalidi. He's written in both English and Arabic. So it's originally in Arabic, but it has been translated into English. So it covers from 1917 to 2017, a history of settler colonialism and resistance. Thereafter, you have another book which has been written by a Israeli historian, and it's written by Ilan Pape is famous, and it's called The Thought Process of Israel. So he talks about how Israel thinks, and how they work in terms of their governance. There's another book by Thomas Suarez, and he calls it the Terror State. The Terror State by Thomas Suarez. There's also another book which has been authored by Pedro Brigia, and he also talks about the Israeli conflict. He discusses the Israeli conflict, and that's based on 100 questions and answers. So he has 100 questions and 100 answers. Thereafter we have, the number of books are many, I'm just giving you a few. There's a book by Edward Said, and he's a famous Palestinian American, and he has written a book on the Palestinian issue and the American community. The Palestinian issue and the American community. So you could say these are a number of books which can be used. Obviously there's a book, for example, specifically about Gaza in English. A book has been written by the Jewish professor Norman Finkelstein, which I'm sure many of you will have heard of. He has a book specifically on Gaza and the wars that have taken place, or the violations against the rights of the Palestinians in Gaza from 2006 until recently. In Arabic, there are also many resources and many books. Obviously, the books of many of the prisoners are beneficial to understand what takes place. For example, one of the prisoner Hassan Salama, who we mentioned previously, was one of the longest serving prisoners. He's written a book in Arabic called 5000 يوم في عالم البرزخ, 5,000 days in العالم البرزخ, because the solitary confinement, they call it the grave of the living, and he explains in there everything that takes place to Palestinian prisoners, and how their daily life is, and compares it to al-alam al-barzakh. So basically it's in between life and the akhirah and death. So he says, am I living or am I dead? There's also a number of other books that have been written. So for example, you have a book in Arabic called Amirul Dhil, or Prince of the Shadows. You have another one called Shahidul Hayy, the Living Martyr, and a number of other books by Palestinian prisoners which are in the Arabic language, which can be benefited from. The research is a lot, and is not obviously everything will not be covered in one book. However, depending on different points that you would wish to research and understand, different periods of time, etc., you can refer to different books, inshallah ta'ala. If there's something specific, you can always ask me afterwards. Thereafter, with regards to the Islamic angle, in brief before we finish, inshallah. So when we look at the issue in Al-Quds and the area surrounding Al-Quds, on one side there's a humanitarian issue, or the humanitarian angle. Then there's a Palestinian angle, the Arab angle, and these are all angles that the issue is looked at. However, for us as Muslims, before it being an issue of Palestinians, or before it being an issue of Arabs, or before it being an issue or even a humanitarian issue, for us it is an Islamic issue before anything else. And don't let anything else divert you from this point. The main issue here is an issue of Islam. Number one, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is the first Qibla. Masjid Al-Aqsa is the second masjid that was built. Masjid Al-Aqsa is the third most holiest site for Muslims. And so Masjid Al-Aqsa is a place which is sanctified for the believers. And the core essence of the dispute between Zionism and the establishment of the state of Israel in this location, in this manner, is the Temple of Solomon, and is the Al-Haykal al-Sulaymani, and this is deemed to be under Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And so the goal, as we've seen, is the replacement of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa with the Temple of Solomon. So this is in fact the compass of the whole conflict. This is the center point of the whole conflict. Everything else is, you could say, secondary to this first point. The greater state of Israel, the greater Israel, the maps that we've seen, etc., covering all the way from the Al-Furat all the way until Egypt, and covering the areas of the surrounding countries also, these all come back to the seat of the kingdom, and the seat of the kingdom is the Temple of Solomon. So this is point number one. Number two, the land of Asham has and is and belongs to the Muslims, and this is something, there was parts of the land which was given waqf by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam to the Sahaba. From them, Tamim al-Dari radiallahu anhu was given part of the land waqf by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and thereafter over the years, majority of large parts of the land of Al-Aqsa and surrounding Al-Aqsa and areas in this whole and land in this whole area of what we know as Palestine is land which is waqf. And waqf land does not belong to an individual. Waqf land, you can go to the fuqaha and the muftis for more detail on waqf, but waqf cannot be given by any individual or sold by an individual to somebody else, and it cannot be given to the enemies of Islam. And so this land is not the right of a single individual to do as he wishes and as he wants. This belongs to the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Secondly, the entire land was under the rule of Muslims, and according to the rule of Islam and all of the madhahib and all of the opinions, that any land which comes under the rule of Islam, and the rule of Islam means justice, because this is the command of Allah, the rule of Allah Azza wa Jal. This land can thereafter not go to being a land of oppressors. It cannot go to those who disbelieve in Allah Azza wa Jal, and therefore it is a duty upon the Muslims to bring back that land so that it be under the justice of the command of Allah Azza wa Jal, because the command of Allah is justice. Anything that opposes the rules of Allah is oppression. And so this land belongs to the Muslims as per the Islamic rule. Now obviously this includes the rights that Islam bestows upon all of the citizens who live under the rule of Islam. And we saw this all the way from the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh, all the way through the time of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, etc. We discussed this in detail of how all of the different minorities who are not Muslims were able to live with peace and security in the and around Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, including the Jews and the Christians. And they lived continuously. The current issue is not related to the issue of minorities or non-Muslims living under Muslim rule. It is the issue of oppression in a land of the Muslims. So this is the Islamic angle, and this is the first angle that we should look at whenever we see any kind of situation or scenario. Then what is the Islamic ruling? I'm not going to go into much detail, but this is the key point, is that number one, before being anything else, it's an issue of Islam. It's an Islamic issue before we can talk about the humanitarian points and everything else. It is many times there are efforts made to make it an Arab issue or a Palestinian issue, but this is not an issue just for Palestinians. Let them decide what they want, or etc. No, this is an issue for the whole Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Thereafter, what can we do? There's activism, So there's being involved, first of all, education. So alhamdulillah, many of us have taken part in this series, and inshallah we will have covered, we can't do justice, but we will have covered many of the major points of discussion during this series. But in addition, we now need to spread whatever knowledge we have to our families, to our friends, and to those around us, so that the whole Muslim community can have an understanding with regards to all of the points of discussion around Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and the land surrounding Al-Aqsa. So first is education, and through education you can then carry out actions of defense, of rebuttal, etc. So you get activism, so being helping and assisting those organizations who are campaigning for our brothers and sisters in whatever shape or form it may be. Then there's also discussions on certain points. So for example, the claim that this land belongs to only the Jews because they were the first inhabitants of the land and the Muslims came afterwards. This claim can be rebutted if you have the knowledge, once you've educated yourself, and you can rebut it in a number of ways. And I think this was a question which was raised a number of sessions ago. But before Banu Israel inhabited the land of Al-Quds and around Al-Quds and Bayt al-Maqdis, the land was inhabited by the Canaanites, the people of Canaan. So they were there before them, and this is documented in history, and nobody rejects this. Even they do not reject this. However, they claim that this land, they have the right to it, and the people of Canaan do not have a right to this land. The reason is because of the slandering of Nuh alayhi salam. The reason is because of the slandering of Nuh alayhi salam. According to their scripture, Nuh alayhi salam, one day he became drunk, and na'udhu billah. And you will find this in the books of the Christians and the Jews in the Old Testament and New Testament, where they slander the prophets alayhimus salam. So Nuh alayhi salam, according to them, he became drunk, and thereafter he went out completely unclothed, with no clothes, and he went out, and the clothes were hidden by the son Cain. And the other sons of Nuh alayhi salam then came, and they gave back the clothes, and then Nuh alayhi salam cursed his son. And the people of Canaan are the descendants of the son Cain of Nuh alayhi salam. And therefore, according to them, these descendants of Nuh alayhi salam through his son are the people of Canaan. They are referred back to Canaan because they come from Cain. And so they are cursed, and Allah promised the other sons of Nuh alayhi salam, who are, according to them, the fathers of Banu Israel, the land of Al-Quds and Bayt al-Maqdis, and cursed the Canaanites that even if they inhabit the land, they can't have it. And this is, if you find, there's in Surah Bani Israel, where Allah Azza wa Jal talks about Banu Israel, and Allah Azza wa Jal talks about the Al-Isra and Al-Isra at the beginning, and thereafter Allah Azza wa Jal goes on to Musa alayhi salam. Thereafter Allah Azza wa Jal talks about the fasad that Banu Israel will do on the earth. In the middle, there's one verse about Nuh alayhi salam. There's one verse about Nuh alayhi salam. And so the question arises, what has Nuh alayhi salam got to with Banu Israel? He came many years before. But if you look at it in this light, then Wallahu alam, this is an indication with regards to the slander of the Banu Israel against Nuh alayhi salam with regards to his son and the incident that took place. So this is part of how we can educate ourselves. Thereafter, there's a number of things we can do. So for example, the boycotts, etc., we should actively be involved. And this is something which, to put simply, number of things. Number one, there's an Islamic ruling. Islamic ruling would be that you cannot carry out transactions with those people who are at open hostilities with Muslims. and this trade will provide them with any kind of support or bolster them. Number two, and so any companies that would provide military aid, or their profits would provide any kind of aid in harming our brothers and sisters, whether you're stopping purchasing from that company has any impact or not in terms of the bigger picture, but there's an individual obligation on you to stop these transactions as much as possible, without going into individual companies and the rulings of details, but that's for the Mufti, inshallah. Number two is that the question or people ask is that we boycott, nothing comes out of it, or everyone doesn't boycott, so what's the point if only I boycott? The answer to that question is, if this shop owner was using the money that was paid by you to him when he bought his products to buy weapons, or to buy a gun or knife or whatever, and he then gives that to his neighbor to come and kill your sister or your brother or your wife or your children or your parents, would you trade with that individual or that shopkeeper? Nobody would. Why am I going to buy something from somebody where I know that even 10 pence of what I have given, or 1 pound of what I have given, is going to kill my own sister or my brother or my mother or my child? In the same way, even if all of the Muslims are not boycotting, and maybe you see that if everyone was to even if the people who are boycotting, it doesn't have much impact. Alhamdulillah, we can see that there has been an impact. But if there was no impact, why would I want my 1 pound to go towards harming our brothers and sisters? So this is a simple summary of boycotting, that we do not want a penny of ours to be spent on harming our brothers and sisters. Thereafter, a very key point which sometimes we forget, which I mentioned also in the Jumu'ah today, was visiting Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Is visiting Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Now, the locals are unable to visit. As we said, there are restrictions, etc. on the Palestinians who are living in the West Bank. And the Palestinians, the 5 million plus who are refugees outside of the land of Palestine, they're not even allowed to visit Palestine at all. So, as people living in the West, we are able to travel to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. There's no restrictions. And so, all of us should travel to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa as much as we can. And we visit Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa with a number of intentions. Number one, the Prophet ﷺ has said that there are only 3 masajid on the surface of this earth that you can go with the intention of ziyarah, to visit, that you will get reward for. And one is Al-Masjid Al-Haram in Mecca, Al-Masjid Al-Nabawi, the Prophet ﷺ mosque in Al-Madinah, and Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. There is no other masjid that you can go to look at the masjid, to visit the masjid with the intention of reward, and make a special journey just to see that masjid. And so that's the first thing. Number two, the Prophet ﷺ has informed us with regards to the virtues of performing salah in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. So we go with the intention of gaining the reward of salah in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And number three, which is very important, is that we go there in order to show solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are there on a continuous basis, 24/7, protecting Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And we also go with the intention of ribat and protecting Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And many people say we can't go to Gaza, but we can go to Al-Aqsa. We can go to Al-Aqsa. And even now, right now, while the war is taking place in Gaza, the route to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is still open. And brothers have been and they continue to go. However, the numbers are very little. But the Palestinians and our brothers there who are in and around Al-Quds, they need us to visit. And it is my hope that from this city of thousands of Muslims, maybe we can have in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa 1 or 2 people from this city in Al-Aqsa during the whole year present in Al-Aqsa. So if we have, for example, a couple of people take 1 week, and other people take a couple of people another week, and like that we have 52 weeks. We only need 104 people from the city of thousands, and that way we can say that this Leicester has given at least 2 people in Ribat and in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa for the whole year. Inshallah, Allah make this dream come true. So we should visit Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa as much as possible, and encourage everyone to go. This is, you could say, alongside dua and etc., you could say this is the greatest act and action that we can do to help our brothers and sisters and to defend Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And there are many other things that we can do in terms of raising awareness. So for example, the Israeli government and organizations, US, they have something called Birthright Israel. And this is an organization that takes Western and American Jews to the Israeli state for 10 days in the summer. Teenagers, they give them a tour, they relink them to their history and to their Jewish ancestry and their lands, etc., and the importance of this land and how the people live. They have a session where they sit with the IDF soldiers, and the IDF soldiers talk to them about their sacrifice for the sake of this land, etc. And a lot of research and has been carried out on those who return with regards to their views on Judaism and their views on Israel and their etc., and where they would like to live their future lives and how they would like to live their future lives, etc. And this increases in them their practicing of their religion. They're more likely to marry someone who has also been on this visit. They are more likely to visit more often, support, and some of them are even more likely to go and reside there. Now, this fund, for example, there's one couple in the US, the biggest funders, by the way, of Trump and Netanyahu. This couple have put inside over $200 million between themselves into this fund, and they fund everyone to go. In one point, they wanted to increase the number of people going in 1 year, so they made a one-off $25 million donation, USD donation. And so we have many Muslim businesses. Alhamdulillah, Allah has blessed the Muslim community with many people, especially in Leicester, who Allah has blessed with wealth. Why don't we set up a fund where we educate the Muslims, where at the moment we have tours going to Al-Aqsa, but they are all small tours run by travel agencies or tour operators who take people on a tour and they get some profit out of it. I'm not saying that's bad. They need obviously money to cover their expenses and their time, etc., and the efforts that they put in. But instead of this, maybe there are people who can't afford to go, and especially for the youth who cannot afford to go, if there was a funded program where tours were taken of Muslims and families to visit Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, etc., or for programs which would provide awareness, etc., this would increase awareness amongst the Muslim community. Thereafter, the future of what will happen. Now, this is the $1 million question, but the answer is simple. Allah Azza wa Jalla in the Quran, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Hadith has promised victory to the believers. Victory has been promised to the believers as long as they are believers, as long as they fulfill the rights of being a believer. Then Allah and His Messenger promise the Ummah victory. And so this is the end. Their certain victory for the believers. However, how this victory will come, in what form, and over what time, this is all in the knowledge of Allah. This is all in the knowledge of Allah. It is upon us to exhaust all of the means we have at our disposal to achieve this goal, and then leave the rest on Allah Azza wa Jal. Leave the rest on Allah Azza wa Jal. We put all our effort in, thereafter whatever Allah has decreed, and when it is decreed, it will happen. But through the decree, through the wisdom of Allah Azza wa Jal. So we ask that Allah Azza wa Jal accept this sitting of ours. We ask that Allah Azza wa Jal accept these hours that we have spent in educating ourselves with regards to the condition of our brothers and sisters in the blessed lands of Al-Quds and Bayt al-Maqdis. These lands are blessed, and inshallah I hope that you have all benefited. I myself have benefited probably much more than you. So for example, the prisoners, we talked about them for half an hour. Alhamdulillah, I probably researched about the prisoners for over 25 hours. What I give here is a very small snapshot of what I go through in order to provide some kind of summary of what has taken place. And alhamdulillah, over the last few months, Allah Azza wa Jal has enabled all of us to benefit, and me especially to benefit from reading and studying and listening to many hours of study and research. We ask that Allah Azza wa Jal makes it beneficial. Allah Azza wa Jal accepts my efforts, accept your efforts. May Allah Azza wa Jal reward the committee and the administration of the masjid for enabling me to and allowing me to carry out this series and provide this opportunity to me to do this presentation. And I thank all of you, and I pray that Allah Azza wa Jal rewards all of you for your attendance, for your dedication. It's been a long journey over 20 weeks and 20 sessions. Today's session has run well over time, and we ask that Allah Azza wa Jal make this act full of sincerity. May Allah Azza wa Jal make this act heavy in our scale, and may Allah Azza wa Jal accept it from us in our endeavor to help and assist our brothers and sisters and to free Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And we ask that Allah Azza wa Jal, through this action of ours, forgives our mistakes and any errors that have been made by myself during this series. And we ask that Allah Azza wa Jal cover our faults, grant us the opportunity to go even further in serving the cause of Allah Azza wa Jal. And may Allah Azza wa Jal grant freedom and liberation and victory to our brothers and sisters. May Allah Azza wa Jal alleviate their suffering. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant them peace and prosperity as our brothers and predecessors lived in the times before. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.